Welcome back, Visions fans. Ready Player Will here. This is the Rulgia character review. Brand new character released this week. We're going through the overview, the base and total stat analysis, all leading up to the report card. We'll then go through the class and job overview of the abilities themselves, the TMR review, my general thoughts to kind of summarize everything now that we've been able to see his kit comprehensively, and then talk a little bit about the job-based vision card eligibility, Esper Synergies, and weapon optimization, just to kind of brainstorm ideas of how to min-max some things. Now, that being said, brand new Earth unit to global. He is one of the new warriors of the crystal, so that is the unique main job they've given him. He does have the sniper and dragoon subjobs as well. He equips guns, hats, cloth, and accessories with a move of 3, jump of 1 as another 100 cost unit. Now, from a resistance standpoint, a lot of double-digit resists here. The most potent is to 20% to magic, 10% to slash and missile, also is a good starting spot. Neutral to strike at 0%. It's really the pierce attack of minus 15% that's just going to blow him out of the sky. Now, he is a 50 faith unit, so you don't have to worry terribly about status ailments, but 50% to frostbite actually is pretty nice for some of those ice duels where Alaya obviously leans really high into that, so doesn't Curry for some of the cost limited stuff. 50% to stop, and then 10% to doom. Little niche. Overall, could be better, could be worse, but you don't have to worry too much about it anyway. Now for the base stats, kicking things off here. Overall HP levels, not terrible, pretty average, but just a little bit skewing lower than your average damage dealer, and that's not a surprise. He's a long-range missile unit that's pretty par for the course, and you're going to see that in many of these base stats. From an attack perspective, way down here at 319, but he is amongst some of the other missile units here as well, so not terribly surprising. This is where a lot of their base stats tend to fall anyway. That's not the end of the story for them. From an agility perspective, at 57 here, which is a little bit above the average. Overall, in a pretty good spot there from an agility perspective. Dexterity, again, kind of like those other missile units, really skews very highly here in the top 5, top 10 of all the potential characters. And then even the luck stat also does skew relatively high here. Both of these things obviously helping accuracy, which we'll talk about in just a minute here. Now we look at some of the total stats when we reconcile how they've built out his board stats, the board notes, the mastery, etc. If we kind of reframe those 5 charts into this one right here, again, that attack stat really sticking out on the lower side of things, but the rest of them, no other real glaring weaknesses per se. When you start including those other stats, though, you do get a lot of shifts here where they do give him back some of the attack stat. The agility stat, they really bump him up a bit. Dexterity and luck kind of taking a step back, and the HP the same as well. They've given him 10 agility on the board, which is really where he makes that biggest increase on that stat alone. And then the attack also does come from his mastery ability, where they've given him 10% attack stat to kind of mitigate that lower base attack stat overall. Bottom line, it's not a ton of glaring weaknesses per se. The HP is on the lower side, but again, not surprising. He is a little squishier than most of your damage dealers nowadays, but par for the course for missile units. A lot of those characters are pretty glass cannon-y in nature. Now, we look at some of the other stats here. Crit hit and crit avoid. From a crit hit perspective, does end up skewing on the higher end of the scale here due to that higher dexterity stat. He's got a bunch of board notes for crit hit as well. And then from a critical avoid rate, that luck stat translates to an above average amount of crit avoidance, coming in here at roughly about 55%. He does have a luck passive that if you equip it, it's about another 5% luck, so it does end up putting him at the higher end of things should you lean into that passive build. Now we get into the accuracy side of things. This is one of his strong selling points. Just total base accuracy without any passives. He does end up on the higher range of characters, and he's got 2 passives that really bump up his potential accuracy. One of them is just a flat accuracy percentage bump. The second one is a luck increase. You won't always have the luck increase, so this is slightly overstated where he is on the green line here, where that probably will fall down about 8% to kind of see where you're looking at my cursor on the screen at the moment. But overall, still an exceptionally accurate unit. Won't take a lot to get him up to speed to hit potential evasion, which on that note brings us to evasion, and he is surprisingly a little higher on the spectrum here, where if you were to max what he can potentially do for luck in terms of vision cards and trust stones, things of that nature, he does end up kind of in the middle range here of where most of the evasion characters can potentially go. He's not an evade unit by any means, but it is something that will happen occasionally if you're building into that, something to keep in mind. We'll talk about that more in just a minute. Now we get to the report card here, kind of summarizing things so far. From an effective HP standpoint, overall going with a D plus on the lower side of things here, even D for the physical side, where that minus 15% to pierce really hurts. But more than anything, he's got no innate defense or spirit, no passives to boost it, no buffs to boost it. So overall, that's starting at a really low point. No self barrier, no AoE or unit resistance, no courage or re-raise. So he is like straight striking out for like everything we look for in modern damage dealers. But again, missile unit, have to keep that in context. Now, he does end up doing relatively well against magic for that 20% innate magic resistance at a B-. I won't say he's strong against magic, but he obviously skews that way. just something to keep in mind here from a survivability perspective. Now, primary stat, that low-end base attack, I'm going with a C- here. No defense penetrative passive, which is a very unique thing for a modern damage dealer nowadays. I won't say he ends up with low attack, but he doesn't end up with high attack. It's basically average, nothing terribly crazy. There's a few ways to really kind of tweak it with penetration and modifiers otherwise when it comes to damage output. Now, agility, straight average at a C. Even with the vision cards, he ends up being around that 80 agility, which is straight UR average, so nothing terribly bad there. No agility passives or buffs either. Accuracy, I'm going with an A. Very good innate accuracy with both passives. Again, if you remove that luck passive, it's about 8% less accurate. No guaranteed hit in the kit, so you will have to invest a little bit of accuracy into him just to make sure he can hit consistently, but not nearly the amount that many other characters do. Now, evasion, I'm going C+ here. I'm kind of rounding down. I would normally even go maybe just a little bit higher. Though not an evade unit, he will benefit from the Earth Evasion synergy when it comes to the vision cards, where obviously Earth really does lean into some evasion builds for many of its characters, and should he be min-maxing your luck stats for them, he actually will dodge a handful of attacks against lesser accurate units. So just keep that in mind. It's not non-existent, it's just not an evade unit in the sense that we know it. But when you talk about survivability, being able to dodge a hit sometimes is the difference between winning and losing a fight. Now, from a movement perspective, A, he is an exceptionally good unit from potential movement. He has a move -1 passive, which is stellar for ranged missile units. He's also got a jump +1 passive, which we've seen many of these missile units do get better trajectories if they can get to better heights. So the ability to get to that second height without the Termaline ring or something is very powerful. Plus, he does have the move jump buff on the Dragoon sub, which is really more for PvE, but it's present, it's there. So he has some excellent movement potential from that perspective. Now, passive abilities, going with a B+ here. Great variety of passives for different situations. He has 2 that I think you're essentially going to equip at all times, but should you decide to flex some of them, there are some other good secondary options. We'll talk about that in a minute. Counter abilities, also going a B+ here. Got a great variety of counters for different situations. One of them obviously shines above the others, but I think the second one here does have an interesting place given Earth Evasion as well. We'll talk about that in a second. The overall kit, I'm going B+ here. He is good on paper with a variety of buff options, has some good utility, but you'll just notice when we go through that section, there's not a lot of, impact in terms of what he offers offensively. He does skew more on the support side of things from that perspective. We'll see that in a second. For the final grade of a B, it's not that he's a bad unit. He's just unfortunately limited to some more niche applications of where you can really maximize his upside. And that's really against low defense enemies and evade units, which, when you don't have defense penetration innately on that passive, he's just going to suffer in terms of consistency across a variety of metas. And you can't just plug and play him like you can with some of the other very strong missile units like Alaya or Eliza, for instance. So as we said, going into the class job overview, the passive abilities. Now, the 2 in particular that I think you're going to have on 90% of the time, all-terrain sharpshooting is his range +2, but it's also his missile attack resistance penetration of 40. If you're on a very small map, he's obviously going to suffer if you can't equip this because you don't want to have that extra range, but otherwise, this is a very good passive. I think my second favorite is the Earthen Entrenchment. This is the initial AP of 15 to start the battle, 25 accuracy, move decrease of 1. Both of these together are very, very good. Now, where you can flex a little bit, long range is really more of a chess matchup on the map for range 1, but even then I don't love it. Jump +1, again, kind of the same idea, very map dependent. You very much need to get him in a unique position. Sniper Mastery is probably my second favorite at that missile attack 15 with the luck of 12%, but Dragoon Lore is a very interesting ability we're going to talk about in a second here too. Increased HP 15% really isn't that strong. It's rather negligible given his base HP, but the healing power 20, something we're going to circle back on in just a second here from an AI perspective. Now, the counter abilities, Destabilizing Draw is his main one, which is a preemptive ability. It's 30% chance to proc, decent range, and it will get further range based on your passives, but it's also a 25% chance to inflict Immobilize, which you love to see on these ranged characters to try to keep enemies at bay so they can't move how they want and they can't, optimize their damage output on you. But I do like Counter Smoke. I just think it's a little too close range for my liking, where if you're near these enemies, you're likely going to die imminently. But when you talk about putting him in an Earth Evade team, being able to decrease enemy accuracy by 43% is pretty powerful. So I think that's an interesting one to play with, but probably not the one you're having on most of the time. And Dragon's Blade, really too niche in terms of what it offers for range it doesn't make sense to put it on him. Now, when we look at the main job buffs, Domain of Earth is really the primary one here that gets emphasized first above Earth Blessing. Domain of Earth is a regen of 10% for 3 turns for a pretty wide diamond around your allies. I love that flexibility. It's also his form of defense penetration here, where it's not on the passive abilities, it's on the buff instead. So he will give himself that 40 and restore AP of 20 for self. So obviously really great ability for a variety of reasons. Earth Blessing is very good as well, though, as a follow-up buff where you increase that range of 1 for 3 turns, but also decrease your chance of being targeted, where when you talk about these squishy characters, being able to make sure that enemies just aren't focusing you innately is very strong. You'll obviously have less chance to get debuffed as well, where a lot of tanks have that problem where they generate hate, but then they get dispelled and they lose that hate. Well, if you start with negative hate, you're likely not going to be the target of a dispel, so you can maintain that minus hate for longer. So it's a very good thing for missile units. Now, when we get into the offensive abilities here, 4 overall, I'm going to go through these individually in a moment, but just talking very high level, his mastery ability does decrease AP consumption by 20%, so this cost is really all reduced by 20%, so I have them in parentheses here for what the true cost is. When we look at the range and the types, he obviously skews a little more towards single target attacks, only 1 giant AoE, but having that range height of 2 is flexible enough for many of these. And another thing to note is that 2 of his abilities are projectile in nature, and that they're parabolic in how they kind of shoot like a true bow and arrow, whereas the other 2 are direct line of sight, which you will shoot your teammates if you don't do it properly, or the AI will limit what you can use so you don't shoot a teammate if you don't have perfect LOS, or line of sight. Now, we talk about the abilities one by one. Break Slug, obviously, is his base ability, does do a fair amount of damage given that it has a 25% missile imperil on it. Dual Disruptor is one that I think you're going to use a lot, just by the nature that it is the 200% modifier. It's also Dispel, Protect, and Shell, so obviously some great utility there, but the decreased move of 1 is also exceptionally good, again, when you consider trying to keep the distance between you and your enemies, but also just being able to throw off the enemy AI. A lot of people mock assuming that their characters will move a certain way, and if you can decrease that move, it typically will throw things into chaos, and you can turn things in your favor. Now, Spread Blast, being that slow giant AoE, decrease evasion rate of 25% for targets. It's a 165% modifier. Don't love this ability. The evasion rate down is cool, but again, that's where you're really seeing that niche application. If you're not going against an evade team, this AoE ability really just doesn't have anything to offer other than 165% modifier, so a little bit lacking in that regard. But finally, Under Bombardment is another very good skill, 165% modifier, but the big thing here is that there is a follow-up attack to it. It has that 50% typeless damage that scales off of a couple different stats, which is very good for countering units with courage. I've done some mocks against Skahal recently where even Earth had a tough time beating those lightning magic teams because of that sustained ability. This is actually a very underratedly good ability to making sure that you can potentially finish off that character quicker, but obviously that goes for many characters as well. A lot of the evade units included, which do have courage as part of their survivability, that he can potentially remove it when using this. So there's a couple good things to like, but I don't know if that's enough to really love. Now, we look at the subjobs here. The Warrior of the Crystal subjob, I actually sneaky like this one, and this is where things get very interesting for him, where Geopiercer A is a nice blend of both unit and AoE, and that it's a piercing type ability that you can at least hit like maybe multiple characters. But that's not really the best thing about this. Healing Shot and Booster Shot from an AI perspective are very interesting in that he prioritizes these buffs over the main job buffs. Now, personally, I would have liked to see both of these combined into one. You really have to pick and choose which one you want to have on, and I don't think Booster Shot is strong enough in auto PvP to prioritize over those 2 main buffs we already talked about. But for manual, it's cool, but I really like the Healing Shot here, where this is kind of similar to Slime, where it's a flat 30% HP that you can give to a teammate. He will prioritize it if they're low health before doing any kind of other buffs, and he's got that passive, which is Healing Power 20, but you can also get Healing Power other ways, right, to amplify that healing that he can do. But the thing that I really kind of like when you think conceptually that if he's going to be move -1 and lag behind your team, as long as enemies aren't necessarily in range yet, I think there's some good potential here where as your teammates start to take damage, that he can very quickly heal them up from range. I think that's a very interesting thing to potentially play with here, where you look at him as more of a support character more than just straight damage dealing. So this is one of my favorite things about his kit in terms of what he can potentially do, but there's some other very viable options that we'll talk about right now as well. When you look at the Sniper subjob next up, I do like this for a variety of reasons, and again, I'm showing on the screen here the updated AP values in parentheses, as well as the range heights here, which are 5, so you get a lot more potential trajectory with these abilities. But I like this one for 2 reasons. Number one, Number one, I love break barrier area. Barrier break arrow, where obviously you can break the physical barrier and reduce the counter chance of 100% for 3 turns. But I love target as a potential buff to switch things up from the main as well, where, you know, there's some overlap there where if you don't want to use both those two buffs on the main job, target's kind of a happy medium where you still get a range 1 and you get your defense penetration, but now you can also use a TMR ability if you really want to as well. I don't love target share here as the other AoE, but I like target, this top ability, as an alternative buff. Now the third one here, Dragoon, I don't love the offensive abilities here. I'm really nervous about the cast time on these jumps for him. I don't think they really offer a whole lot that he wouldn't do already. But Dragon's Kin as a buff here is an exceptionally good buff. Attack of 42% for 3 turns, grants Protect to himself as well, crit rate of 25, and reaction block rate of 100 as long as the Protect is up. So there's a ton of things here on the Dragon's Kin buff that, again, if you want to use this and then a TMR, I think this is a really interesting secondary AI option to go with as opposed to the main job. Now, personally, I'm not saying these buffs are better than the main job. I think I prefer the main job buffs with the healing potential, but these are very good strategic secondary options that, if you noticed, his effective HP, as I mentioned, was relatively low. The ability to give himself Protect like this does have some potential value, as well as that bump to crit rate, which we'll talk about more in a moment, but normally crit rate is a big buff to his damage output and making sure you can get that crit damage as well. So now, when we look at the Limit Break and the Mastery ability, this Limit Break, it's a triple hit, range height of 2, it's an attack buff of 40% for himself, so this will help his damage a fair bit. It's also an AP auto restore of 5% for 3 turns, so this will help his damage uptime, that he doesn't have to stop shooting at all. This is a good limit break for himself, but not a great limit break because it obviously is very selfish. It doesn't do anything for his teammates or to do something to debuff or imperil an enemy, so this is good for his potential damage output, but it's kind of limited in that regard. So like it, it's a good one, but don't love it. Now the Mastery ability, what they did for him here, and I'm sorry, circling back, it is relatively cheap at 35 for a Limit Break, though, because of that decreased AP consumption that we're seeing here. But other than that, for the Mastery ability, they kind of cheapened out and gave him only attack of 10%. They didn't have to do that. They could probably just given him some higher base attack or higher board stats. It's kind of a waste on the Mastery ability, but that's neither here nor there. Now, we look at the TMR. This is an accessory that's got 318 HP, 12 defense, 12 accuracy. The ability on it, though, is defense of 20 for 3 turns for self and grant Protect. So again, you're seeing some different options here for if you want to give him Protect, but obviously any other character as well. I immediately thought of a similar TMR to Noctis when I saw this, where Noctis is also a self-protect, but the big difference here is that Noctis is a cloth type of equipment, whereas Rulgia's is an accessory. So a little more gearing flexibility for Rulgia's if you want to still maintain having that Protect. I just don't know if the defense of 20 is game-changing. There's so much defense penetration in the game at the moment, but obviously in very physical heavy metas this has some potential usage. It's got 2 casts, which you love to see. It's a self buff. I like it. I don't love it. I don't know how prevalently it's going to get used, but could be a lot worse. Now, my general thoughts overall. So interesting character from a buff priority perspective, and I'm just going to list some of my favorites here, because obviously there's a lot of different ways you can build a character with a move of 3 or a move of 2. How far they go to buff a teammate, whether it's AoE, if they get both teammates or one teammate, they run in circles. There's a lot of different options for a bunch of different maps, and some of my favorites obviously are on the main, that giant AoE regen, the defense penetration of 40, the AP of 20 for self. On the main subjob, also that range 1 and hate down 6. I do love on the sniper, kind of, again, that happy medium of both of these where you get that range 1 and defense penetration of 40, and then on the Dragoon subjob, that attack buff, which unfortunately doesn't stack with his limit break, but should allow for some extra, buff uptime. But other than that, the Protect, the crit rate 25, and the reaction block 100, I like the versatility when you include a TMR in this as well, in terms of what you want to do for him self-buffing or teammate buffing. I think there's a bunch of different options. And again, to me, he's got 2 main niches. A really anti-evasion, and that's purely because that AoE evasion down, he's got that high accuracy, he's got the follow-up attack that can dispel the courage of many of those units. So that's one of the main niches that I see him thriving in. But the second one is being good in a magic-heavy meta. And what I mean by this is, if you're in a magic-heavy meta, people will start building for higher spirit in their builds and kind of omit their defense, right? Well, when those people are omitting defense and not going for very high defensive values, that's where Rulgia finally gets some of his upside, because he has no defense penetration like many of those other damage dealers do. So if you are in a very, physical heavy meta and a lot of people have defense stat, Rulgia is going to suffer. but in the opposite metas, he's going to do a lot better. And obviously, if you're in a magic meta, he's got that innate 20% magic resistance to go well with that. But there's a lot of other external things, Esper-wise and vision card things, that make sense for that as well. So if you're not in these two situations, he's a good character, but just not as good as many of the others. Now, I do think he has some good underrated mechanics for his survivability. The hate down buff, the decreased enemy move of 1, again, to maintain that distance, and the immobilize on the counter chance, all are good X factors to making sure that he can kind of keep in range and stay alive. And he will also reap the upsides of Earth Evasion. So again, he's not an evade unit, but if you are maxing the luck on your team, you have the chance to dodge some attacks, which obviously helps his survivability. This obviously is downside is will not be the case against an enemy evade team, which is one of the things he's good against. So again, he's not an evade unit, but when the enemy has such high luck, you have no chance of dodging things anyways. Now, overall, great AP management. He's got that decreased AP consumption. He's got AP regen on the limit break. Domain of Earth is 37 AP when you use that buff on the main job, not including what you get from acquired AP on a Truststone passive. So that's a really good thing. You don't have to worry about bells on him at all. He can just kind of shoot and go. But very limited from an AoE attack perspective. Again, if you go through all those abilities, the evasion down ability is the only AoE that he has in his kit, so super limiting. So if I'm kind of brainstorming out loud what I think 2 potential good equipment synergies are to leverage that I think of Sneaky Snuggles as a TMR option, which is the unit resistance down, so that'll obviously help him and other Earth units to chain people down quickly, because again, even Earth as a cast of characters isn't very big on AoE anyway, so it's not like he's unique in that regard. So him and his teammates should benefit greatly from that. But second to that, I actually love the Thornlet as a good accessory because it's got defense penetration on it equal to what the new weapon does. So I love already that he's got the defense penetration. But secondly, if you are going for that high crit rate build, you'll be able to reduce enemy agility when landing critical hits. So at least when you're using that AoE, you'll get some extra utility in addition to the evasion rate down. You'll at least get the agility percent down as well too. So I really like the Thornlet from that regard, from a gearing flexibility. It's also got AP on it as well. So again, talk about AP management, that's a good option to have. But other than that, I don't really have much to say. Good, not great, situational. Obviously, that's the reason why a lot of people have passed on him in the meantime. But as we continue on here, some of the job-based vision cards, the 2 that currently exist are the Sylvie vision card and the Urella vision card. Obviously, both of these are good, but not necessarily stellar. I know at least the Sylvie one has some good upside. The Urella vision card has been kind of a stinker up till now. Coming this week though, we do have the new missile attack up vision card, and this also has magic resistance on it. So again, leaning into that anti-magic build, this card does help him do that. And then down the line in the future, there's this Mashri and Raychess card and the Reagan Rain card. I do think the Raychess Mashri card, this has AoE resistance and dexterity on it, so I do like this one to look forward to as well. But other than that, nothing too special from a job-based vision card perspective. I would stick to obviously what Earth has for mono element in the meantime. Now for Esper Synergies, obviously want to focus Earth attack, human killer, missile attack for your primary modifiers. You still want to go for some accuracy. Just because he's a very accurate unit innately doesn't mean you can just give up and do nothing. You still want to get some sorts of accuracy to help amplify things. But then after that, it's really defense and spirit and matchup dependent on the element resistant. Obviously, Odin and Dark Odin are my 2 favorite all the time for all DPS, objectively better in most situations. I do think Titan and Golem are interesting second units though, where again you get Earth attack up, defense or spirit. Titan's got accuracy, Golem's got human killer, so a little slower, but they have some good other board nodes. And finally, I think other good options, Brachiosaur, Elphicaris are obviously good. Brachiosaur has the crit rate, the magic resistance again, the missile attack up. Elphicaris has Earth attack, missile resistance, and crit damage, so a lot of good things to overlap. And Chocobo for honorable mention, because that's still one of the go-to missile Espers, but not nearly as good as these others, in my opinion. Now, for the weapon optimization, the Gaia Type 100 just came out. This is okay for a weapon. The defense penetration of 20, not terribly unique. The Valiant gun already had it. This is a better version of Valiant, though. It's not that much better. The conditional abilities here of crit rate and crit damage of 15 is a step up for Trust Stones in terms of what it offers for potency, and obviously frees up some of those Trust Stone slots. So that's a good thing. Just I don't know it's a game changer, and I don't think the aim build is good at all for this. Only 10 accuracy is woefully low. I would go for the assault in like 100% of the cases. Now, I do think a good secondary option here is still the good old Raz Algevi, 228 attack on the assault build. You still get the missile attack 15. Obviously that's really it for what you get. This is more just for focusing on damage, that if you were to pair this with the Thornlet, let's say, you get your defense penetration from there. you can equip this instead. Outside of these two, obviously there are other gun options, but I just don't think they're as good or do anything to really elevate him that these don't already do by themselves. That being said, special mention of a TMR here. I always keep this one in my back pocket, but a friend of mine on Discord brought it up as a question. His name is Relby on Discord, where he was asking about this in terms of what the decreased chance of being targeted means with his buff, and the answer is yes, these stack. So if you equip this TMR, he will start the battle at -6, and then when you go to buff, it will be another 6. So this is actually a very good option for making sure that you take no focus fire at all from the enemy, which obviously helps if you're running him with an evade unit, where maybe the evade unit just keeps dodging stuff and people keep attacking him because Rulgia's hate is so low that he just won't get targeted. But that's the Rulgia character review in a nutshell. Again, there's some things to like, a couple things that have some good upside. He will be getting his 140 in Dream Enhancement relatively quickly here after the 3rd anniversary, so power creep wise, he actually will keep in step with where the game is going. That's at least a nice thing to reassure ourselves with. But other than that, I think most people have passed on him in the meantime, just saving up for the 3rd anniversary, and just objectively speaking, him not offering a whole lot that's going to tip the scales, particularly because of how strong Wind is at the moment. So that's it for now. Hopefully this was insightful and informative, and I will talk to you all soon.